The office was nearly empty when Emily realized the time. It was almost 7:30, and she was still staring at her computer screen, the glow reflecting in her tired eyes. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, leaving behind the faint smell of coffee and the hum of computers left on standby. She rubbed her temples and sighed. Her presentation for the Carter account was due first thing tomorrow, and she couldn't leave until it was perfect. Emily had worked at Weston & Hart for almost 2 years now, and she'd built a quiet reputation for being dependable, detail-obsessed, and always the last to leave. Some saw it as dedication. Others called it overkill. But Emily didn't mind. She wasn't the kind of person who left things half done, especially not when the person reviewing her work was Daniel Weston, the company's founder and her boss. Daniel Weston was the kind of man who could walk into a room and silence it without saying a word. He was calm, intelligent, and intimidatingly composed. His reputation in the corporate world was sharp, successful, demanding, and precise. Emily had spent months trying to figure out what kind of person he was outside of that calm professionalism, but he was hard to read. He wasn't unkind, but he was distant, as if he carried the weight of a dozen responsibilities he never let anyone see. As she scrolled through her slides, trying to make sense of her own ideas, a shadow passed by the glass wall of her cubicle. She looked up and froze. Daniel was still there. His office door, usually shut tight after hours, stood open. He was holding his coat, standing in the doorway, and looking right at her. "You're still here?" he asked. His voice was low, but steady, the kind that made people listen even if he wasn't giving an order. Emily straightened, quickly closing a few unnecessary tabs on her screen. "Yes, sir. I just want to finish the presentation for tomorrow. I'll be done soon." Daniel glanced at the clock on the wall and frowned. "It's almost 8. She smiled lightly, trying to ease the tension. "Guess I lost track of time." He didn't smile back, but there was something in his expression that wasn't annoyance. It was curiosity. "How long have you been working on that deck?" "Since morning," she admitted, then quickly added, "It's just, I want it to be right." He crossed his arms, watching her quietly for a moment before saying, "Come with me. Let's take a look together." Emily blinked. "Together?" "Yes," he said simply. "I want to see what you're building." It took her a few seconds to process it. Daniel Weston never stayed late with anyone, not even senior managers. He usually left by 6 sharp, after reviewing his schedule for the next day. Yet here he was, waiting for her to follow. She quickly grabbed her laptop, heart beating faster than it should, and walked with him toward the conference room. The city glowed outside the tall windows, skyscrapers glimmering against a navy blue sky. The conference room lights flickered on, reflecting across the polished table. Daniel set his laptop down at the far end and gestured for her to sit next to him. Emily sat, feeling strangely nervous, as he leaned closer to view her screen. "Walk me through your concept," he said. His tone wasn't demanding, more curious, almost patient. Emily explained her vision for the client campaign, how she wanted it to feel personal, emotional, not just about numbers. She spoke quickly, afraid she might bore him. But when she risked a glance at his face, he wasn't checking his phone or looking distracted. He was listening, really listening. "That's a strong direction," he said finally, nodding slightly. "But your message loses focus halfway through. The first slides are emotional, then it turns too formal. You need consistency." Emily frowned, turning her laptop toward him. "I thought the mix would show range." "It does," he said, "but it also confuses the tone. Try keeping one emotional thread running through it." As he spoke, he reached across the table and rearranged a few slides, the faint sound of the trackpad clicking under his fingers. His movements were slow, deliberate. Emily watched his hands, his concentration, and the small crease between his brows when he thought deeply. She caught herself staring and quickly looked back at her notes. "That makes sense," she said softly. "I'll fix it now." "Good," he said, glancing at her. "You have an instinct for this, Emily. Don't overthink what you already understand." Her chest tightened. It was the first compliment he'd ever given her, and it felt like it carried more weight than it should. They kept working for another hour. The room fell into a rhythm of quiet conversation, soft keyboard clicks, and the rain that had started outside. Time slipped by unnoticed. Every now and then, Daniel would lean closer to see her laptop, his sleeve brushing against her arm. Each time, she told herself to ignore it, to focus. But it was hard to ignore how human he suddenly felt. Not the composed figure from meetings, but a man who stayed behind to help when he didn't have to. By the time they finished, the presentation looked different. Clearer, smoother, stronger. Emily leaned back and smiled. "That's the best it's looked all week." Daniel closed his laptop. "You did the work. I just helped you see the ending." She laughed lightly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. "I appreciate it. I didn't expect to have a late-night editing session with my boss." His lips curved faintly, almost a smile. Neither did I. The air between them felt different now. Softer. Familiar in a way that didn't make sense. Emily stood, gathering her things. "I guess I owe you coffee for this," she joked. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You don't owe me anything. Just make sure you take credit for your work tomorrow. You've earned it." His words lingered in her mind as they walked toward the elevator. The office was silent except for the distant sound of rain tapping the windows. When they reached the doors, Daniel pressed the button, then turned toward her. "Emily," he said quietly. She looked up, startled by the way he said her name. Gentle, almost personal. "You're good at what you do," he continued. "But don't forget to rest. Work doesn't mean much if you're too tired to enjoy your success." She smiled faintly. "I'll try to remember that." The elevator arrived. As she stepped in, she caught his reflection in the mirrored doors, still standing there, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The doors closed slowly between them, and Emily felt her heart shift. It was just one night, just a few hours of unexpected teamwork. But something had changed. It wasn't spoken, it wasn't clear, and maybe it wasn't even meant to happen. But she knew it the moment she looked back through the glass walls, and saw the light from his office still glowing long after she left. That night, as she walked through the rain toward her car, Emily realized she wasn't thinking about the presentation anymore. She was thinking about Daniel Weston, the man she thought she knew, but maybe didn't at all. And somewhere between the sound of rain and the memory of his quiet smile, she knew this was only the beginning. The morning after staying late with Daniel felt heavier than usual. Emily arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, trying to shake off the strange energy that had followed her home. She kept replaying the night in her head, the way he smiled. For the first time, how his voice softened when he said her name, how the air between them had quietly changed. She told herself it was just gratitude, that he'd been kind to help her finish the project. But deep down, something else lingered, something she didn't want to name. When Daniel walked into the office that morning, the usual chatter among the team fell quiet for a second, as it always did. He greeted everyone briefly and went straight to his office. As he passed by her desk, his eyes met hers for only a second. No smile, no nod, but enough to make her forget what she was typing. She tried to focus, but the memory of last night felt like a whisper she couldn't turn off. By 10 o'clock, the whole team gathered in the conference room for the presentation. Emily's heart raced as Daniel introduced her to the clients. It was the biggest account she'd ever handled, and every pair of eyes in the room was on her. But when she began speaking, the nervousness faded. The words flowed, the slides worked, The story she'd built made sense now. When the presentation ended, the clients applauded lightly, impressed. Daniel looked at her, a small spark of pride in his expression. "Excellent work," he said simply. Those 2 words meant more than any applause. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The team celebrated with a quick lunch, laughter echoing through the break room. But Emily noticed Daniel didn't join. He congratulated everyone, then returned to his office, as if the day didn't affect him. It was strange, how he could seem so distant, even after what felt like a personal moment between them the night before. That evening, when most people left, Emily stayed a little longer to catch up on emails. The office lights dimmed again, and she noticed Daniel's door still open. He was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. For a minute she thought about just leaving, but then she gathered her courage and knocked. He turned. "Still here?" he asked, the same question as last night. "I could ask you the same," she said, smiling faintly. Daniel gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "You did well today. The clients were impressed." "Thank you," she said. "I'm glad it went well." He nodded, but his expression was thoughtful. "You were nervous in the beginning, weren't you?" She laughed softly, terrified. "But once I started, I stopped thinking about how scared I was." "That's good," he said, sitting down. "Confidence doesn't come from being fearless. It comes from doing it anyway." There was a quiet pause. Emily wanted to say something, anything, to keep him talking. There was a rare calmness in the room, a space where Daniel wasn't her boss, but just a man who understood what pressure felt like. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up. "Of course. Why did you stay last night?" "You didn't have to help me." He leaned back in his chair, thinking before he answered. "Because I saw how much it mattered to you. And because sometimes it's easy to forget what it feels like to care that much about something." His voice was quiet, sincere. Emily nodded slowly, unsure what to say. After a long silence, Daniel closed his laptop and stood. "You should go home, Emily. You've done enough for 1 week." She smiled faintly, picking up her things. "Only if you promise to do the same." He laughed under his breath, a small, genuine laugh that caught her off guard. "Deal." As she left his office, she felt lighter, though she didn't understand why. She told herself it was admiration, nothing more. But admiration had a way of turning into something else before you noticed. Over the next few days, things between them changed subtly. Daniel began stopping by her desk more often, not always for work, sometimes just to ask how she was doing. Once he brought her coffee, saying, "You look like you need this more than I do." She laughed, and he smiled, a real one this time. The others in the office noticed. Jenna, her closest friend at work, leaned over one afternoon and whispered, "Okay, spill it. What's going on between you two?" Emily almost dropped her pen. "Nothing. He's my boss, Jenna." Jenna grinned. "Sure, but he's also Daniel Weston. The guy who barely talks to anyone and suddenly he's giving you coffee and compliments. Come on, Em." Emily rolled her eyes, pretending not to care, but her heart betrayed her. She knew it wasn't nothing. There was a shift, small, quiet, unspoken, but real. That Friday, the team went out for dinner to celebrate the successful client deal. The restaurant was lively, full of laughter and music. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his usual composed self, though every now and then his eyes found Emily's. Once, their gazes met, and for a second too long, neither of them looked away. Later, when the dinner ended, the others decided to go to a nearby bar. Emily politely declined, saying she was tired. As she waited for her cab outside, Daniel appeared beside her. "You're leaving?" She nodded. "It's been a long week. Do you want me to wait with you until your car comes?" he asked. She hesitated. "That's not necessary." "I insist," he said quietly. They stood under the streetlight, the city noise fading into the background. It wasn't awkward, just quiet. The kind of quiet that says everything you're both too careful to say out loud. "Thank you," she said finally, looking up at him. "For what?" "For being kind." Daniel's expression softened. and for the first time, she saw a flicker of warmth beneath the formality. "You make it easy to be kind, Emily." Her heart skipped. The cab pulled up, headlights reflecting in the puddles on the street. She opened the door and turned back to him. "Good night, Mr. Weston." He hesitated, then said softly, "It's Daniel." "You can call me Daniel." She smiled, her pulse quickening. "Good night, Daniel." As the car pulled away, Emily leaned back against the seat, the city lights blurring past her window. She tried to tell herself it was just professional respect, just appreciation. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple anymore. Something was happening between them. Something slow, delicate, and uncertain. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was there in every look, every small pause between words, every quiet moment that felt heavier than it should. She didn't know where it would lead. She wasn't even sure if it should lead anywhere. But she knew one thing for certain. Her life at Weston and Hart wasn't going to be the same again. And somewhere on the other side of the city, Daniel sat in his apartment, staring at the same presentation slides they had worked on together, realizing he wasn't thinking about the project anymore. He was thinking about her. The night they stayed late had started as work. But now, it was something else entirely. A beginning neither of them had planned. But both could feel, and no matter how hard they tried to ignore it, they both knew that something small had already changed everything. The following week brought an energy to the office that Emily couldn't quite define. Everything looked the same. Same desks, same buzzing lights, same routine. But something between her and Daniel had shifted. Their exchanges were still professional, but now there was warmth behind the words, small glances that seemed to last longer than necessary. And though no one said anything openly, the air around them seemed to hum with quiet curiosity. Daniel had always been the kind of man who lived in control, measured, composed, and always 2 steps ahead. But lately, even he noticed how Emily's presence was affecting him. Her voice stayed in his mind long after meetings ended. Her laughter, rare but genuine, seemed to echo in the quiet corners of his day. He told himself it was admiration for her work, yet deep down, he knew that wasn't the full truth. That Tuesday, a new project came in. Urgent, high stakes, and complicated. Daniel chose Emily to lead it. When he announced it in the meeting, she looked surprised. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "I wouldn't assign it if I wasn't," he said, his tone steady. "You've proven yourself." Her cheeks flushed with quiet pride. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As days passed, they worked side by side more than ever. Long hours turned into late evenings again, though this time they didn't feel quite like work. There were small jokes, shared coffee breaks, quiet conversations that slipped beyond deadlines and reports. Once, when a file crashed just before a big presentation, Emily nearly panicked, but Daniel stayed calm, guiding her through fixing it. "You panicked too fast," he said lightly. "And you don't panic at all," she replied, trying to laugh. He smiled. "Maybe we balance each other out." That sentence lingered in her thoughts long after he said it. By Friday, they finally completed the project. The presentation was flawless, earning praise from both clients and upper management. That evening, as everyone packed up, Daniel appeared by her desk. "You're free this weekend?" he asked casually. She blinked, caught off guard. "I think so. Why?" "There's a small company dinner Saturday night. A few executives will be there. You should come. It'll be good for you to make connections." "Are you sure I should be there?" she asked, unsure. "Positive," he said, smiling faintly. "You've earned your place at that table." The dinner took place at a cozy, upscale restaurant downtown. Emily arrived early, wearing a soft blue dress, not too formal, but elegant. When Daniel arrived, he looked different out of his suit jacket, more relaxed, almost approachable. As the evening went on, conversations flowed easily. Emily found herself seated beside him, laughing at stories from colleagues she barely knew before. Every now and then, Daniel leaned close to make a quiet comment only she could hear, and every time he did, her heart beat faster. After dinner, a few people decided to go for drinks nearby. Daniel offered to walk Emily to her car instead. The city lights glimmered around them, and a light breeze swept through the street. "Tonight went well," he said. It did, she agreed. I didn't expect to have so much fun. He looked at her with that calm, unreadable expression again. You should. You've earned every bit of it. They reached her car, and for a moment neither of them moved. There was a pause, a kind that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. Thank you for inviting me, she said softly. Thank you for coming, he replied. When he smiled, it wasn't the polite one she was used to at work. It was something warmer. She wanted to say something else, but her voice caught. So she just smiled back and said goodnight. The weekend passed in quiet confusion. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel looked at her under the city lights. It wasn't just admiration anymore. It felt deeper, heavier, and more dangerous. She told herself not to read into it, but the heart doesn't follow logic. On Monday, she tried to act normal, but it was impossible. Daniel noticed her hesitation, her distracted glances. He called her into his office that afternoon under the pretense of discussing another client. When she walked in, he looked at her for a moment before saying, You've been quiet today. I've just been thinking, she said. He leaned back, crossing his arms. About work? She hesitated. Not exactly. Their eyes met. Something unspoken filled the silence. Then Daniel looked away, running a hand through his hair. Emily, he said quietly. You know we have to be careful. I know, she whispered. It's not that I don't. He stopped himself, shaking his head. This job, this place, it's complicated, she nodded. You don't have to explain. I understand. But even as she said it, she felt something inside her breaking a little. He looked at her again, eyes soft but conflicted. You make it harder to keep things simple. She didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. That night she stayed late again, this time alone. The office was quiet, just the hum of the city outside. She was finishing up a few reports when she heard a familiar voice. You shouldn't be here this late again. Daniel stood by the door, holding 2 coffees. He set one beside her. You skipped lunch, she smiled faintly. You notice everything, don't you? Only when it matters, he said softly. They talked for a while, about work, about life, about everything that didn't involve the rules that kept them apart. The closeness between them wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, like 2 people standing at the edge of something they both wanted but were afraid to step into. After a long pause, Daniel said, You're good at what you do. Emily, don't ever let anyone make you doubt that. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. Do you ever wish things were different? He exhaled slowly. Every day. The clock ticked in the silence that followed. They didn't touch, didn't cross any line, but the air between them carried everything they couldn't say. Finally, Daniel stood, his expression guarded again. Go home, Emily, it's late. She nodded, her throat tight. Good night, Daniel. Good night, he said quietly. When she walked out of the building, the cold air hit her face, and she realized something had changed. They hadn't done anything wrong, but the distance between right and almost wrong had never felt thinner. Over the next few days, their rhythm became quieter. He still stopped by her desk, still smiled sometimes, but there was an unspoken wall between them now. They were both pretending not to feel something that was already too real. One afternoon, while reviewing a client proposal, their hands brushed as they reached for the same folder. It was a tiny moment, but it made her pulse race. Daniel quickly withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. Careful, he said softly, as if the word carried more meaning than it should. That night, Emily sat by her window at home, staring at the city lights below. She thought about all the moments that had led here. The long nights, the quiet conversations, the way he said her name. What started as respect had become something deeper, something that scared her because it felt too real, too possible. She didn't know what Daniel felt exactly, but she knew this. Something inside both of them was changing, and pretending otherwise wouldn't make it go away. For the first time, she realized that maybe the night they stayed late wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe it was the start of a story neither of them saw coming. And deep down, She sensed that soon they would have to face what they'd both been avoiding, because when feelings grow in silence, they never stay silent forever. The next week felt like standing on the edge of a storm that refused to break. Emily and Daniel both knew something was changing between them, but neither dared to speak it aloud. Their conversations had grown shorter, their glances rarer. And yet, every silence between them seemed to carry a heartbeat of its own. One Thursday evening, a sudden email changed everything. Their firm was asked to prepare a major presentation for an unexpected client visit, due the next morning. Everyone else had already gone home, and the responsibility fell to Daniel and Emily. Again, they stayed late. The office was quiet except for the soft tapping of keys and the faint sound of rain outside. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Around 9 p.m., Emily rubbed her eyes, exhaustion settling in. Daniel noticed and placed a cup of coffee beside her. "You've been at this since morning," he said. "So have you," she replied, smiling faintly. He leaned against the table, watching her for a moment. "I don't mind long days," he said softly. "Not when you're here." The words hung in the air between them, gentle but heavy. Emily's heart raced. She didn't know how to respond, so she just looked down at her screen. "We should finish this," she murmured. They worked quietly for another hour, the rain now hitting harder against the windows. When they finally sent the final draft, it was nearly midnight. The city lights shimmered through the glass walls, and everything felt still. Emily stretched, sighing in relief. "We made it," Daniel smiled. "We always do." As he spoke, the power flickered for a moment, the storm outside growing stronger. A low rumble of thunder rolled through the night, and the lights dimmed. They both laughed softly at the timing. "Well," Emily said, glancing toward the window. "Looks like we're not leaving anytime soon." Daniel checked his phone. No signal. "Storm must have taken out the tower," he said. They waited in silence, listening to the rain. For the first time in weeks, the tension between them didn't feel heavy. It felt calm. "I remember when I first hired you," Daniel said suddenly. "You walked into that interview looking like you didn't believe you belonged here." Emily smiled softly. "I didn't. I thought you'd take one look at my resume and say no." "I almost did," he said, smiling faintly. "But you kept talking about why this job mattered to you. I saw something then. You cared." She looked at him quietly, her voice lower now. "And what do you see now?" He hesitated, his gaze steady. "Someone who deserves more than she gives herself credit for." Her breath caught. "Daniel..." He took a slow step closer but stopped, his expression conflicted. "I shouldn't..." "I know," she whispered. The storm outside cracked, lighting up the room for a second. Neither moved. It wasn't about crossing lines. It was about everything they hadn't said, all the emotions that had been waiting to surface. Finally, Daniel sighed, stepping back. "Emily, I care about you, more than I should. But this, whatever it is, it's complicated." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I care too, but I don't want to lose what I've worked for. Or you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You won't lose me." But both of them knew that wasn't something he could promise. When the storm eased, they packed up quietly. As Daniel locked his office, he said softly, "Let me walk you to your car." The air outside was cool and damp, the streets glistening under the streetlights. They reached her car, and for a moment, neither of them wanted the night to end. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "You've earned everything you have." She smiled faintly, then hesitated. "It's strange, isn't it? How one night can change how you see everything." Daniel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "It doesn't have to change anything. Doesn't it already?" She whispered. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, just enough to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, respectful, and yet so intimate that it said everything they couldn't. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Emily." "Good night," she said softly, her heart breaking a little as she watched him walk away. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The image of him standing in the rain light, looking torn between duty and something deeper, stayed with her. She knew things couldn't go back to how they were, but she also knew she didn't want to lose the quiet connection they had built. The next morning, the presentation went perfectly. Daniel was his usual composed self in front of the clients, and Emily matched his focus with quiet professionalism. No one would have guessed what had passed between them the night before. When it was over, Daniel caught her outside the conference room. "You did great," he said, his voice low. "So did you," she replied. They exchanged a small, knowing smile before walking in opposite directions. Over the next few weeks, things settled again. Their conversations returned to work, their interactions measured. But every now and then, there was a moment, a shared glance, a brief smile that reminded them of what almost happened. And strangely, that was enough. Months later, Emily received an offer from another branch of the firm in Chicago, a promotion she had only dreamed of. She hesitated before telling Daniel, unsure how he'd react. When she finally did, he listened quietly. "It's a great opportunity," he said. "You should take it. You think so?" she asked softly. He nodded. "You've earned it. I'd be proud to see you lead your own team." Her chest tightened. "I'll miss this place," he smiled faintly. "You'll make new places better just by being there." There was a pause, then she asked, "And you?" He looked at her carefully. "I'll miss you too." She swallowed hard, holding back tears. "Thank you, Daniel, for believing in me when I didn't." He smiled, a small, sincere one. "Always." On her last day, the team gathered to wish her luck. Daniel gave a short speech, professional as always, but his eyes lingered a moment too long when he handed her a farewell gift, a silver pen engraved with her initials. Later, when everyone left, Emily turned to him. "Goodbye, Daniel." He nodded slowly. "Goodbye, Emily. You'll do great." As she walked out for the last time, she looked back once, just once, and saw him watching from the glass wall of his office. There was pride in his eyes and something softer, something that didn't need words. Outside, the evening sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the city. Emily took a deep breath, feeling both heavy and free. The chapter with Daniel wasn't ending with regret. It was ending with gratitude. Sometimes, she thought, the people who change you the most aren't meant to stay forever. They're meant to help you see yourself clearly before you move on. Months later, in her new office overlooking Lake Michigan, she found herself smiling at the memory of that stormy night. It hadn't been love in the ordinary sense. It had been something quieter, deeper. Respect, connection. A moment that shifted her life in ways words could never capture. And somewhere back in New York, Daniel probably still worked late, coffee in hand, maybe remembering too. Thanks you, the end.